Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
There isn't really a counterforce strong enough to prevent these kinds of norm violations from unfolding, and maybe the Supreme Court will be it. I don't think anyone feels certain of that, although I've heard many folks say, "Oh, it's going to be 9-0. They just won't stand for it." Well, I'll believe it when I see it. And even in California, you got the lieutenant governor going out saying, just comb through every rule and regulation there is and see if you can't colorably find some reason somewhere that you can interpret and bend to the obvious will of the California regime to get Trump off the ballot. So, the temperature is rising. I doubt that the Supreme Court alone is going to be enough to stop one of these twigs from snapping. They're not load-bearing twigs in isolation, and when you put them all together, you don't get a bundle of sticks that can withstand any pressure. You probably just get a bunch of snapping twigs.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind for our last episode of the year and, providentially, also our 200th episode. You can't see me, but I'm shooting confetti into the air. There are streamers flying behind me. We're all in a very celebratory mood here at the end of the year and the upcoming holiday season. We've got a few last final news items to address before we bid you all a very Merry Christmas. The first of which is this really astonishing. Well, I keep on this podcast, I always want a word for shocking but not surprising. But that's what this is, this Colorado Supreme Court decision to kick Trump off the ballot in the primaries. This, if you have not already heard of it in some shape or form, just to give the top line items, there are actually some interesting twists and turns here. So I'm going to lay them out and then let Ryan correct me on anything I got wrong or add to the backstory, as I'm sure he will. So Amendment 14 of the U.S. Constitution, which you can read along with the rest of the Constitution in the Claremont Institute's new and very handsome pocket-sized edition, is a Civil War era addition to the Constitution, of which Section 3 prohibits any person from holding office who, quote, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States. The full sentence here is, I guess it's maybe, no, it's all one sentence. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector or of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. And so in a 4-3 decision, the Colorado court decided that Trump is excluded by this section of the amendment because of January 6th, when he did a heckin' insurrection. And since that is the word that has been repeatedly applied to that whole debacle, this is now written into the Colorado court record. Almost certain, I would think, to go to the Supreme Court, and I will venture even to say almost certain to be overturned. It's really hard to imagine this standing. It certainly would be lighting a match and dropping it onto a bucket of kerosene if it were to stand. I will note, however, that there is a sentence which is not getting quite as much coverage as perhaps it should after that sentence I just read from Section 3, which is, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Less likely, I would think, that will come about. But just to point out that the Supreme Court is not the only recourse or potential remedy here. The only other piece of information I want to throw on the table, and this is kind of a deep cut that some of our listeners probably will remember, is that this theory, although it got going immediately after January 6th, really kind of received a kick in the pants and some jet fuel from, of all places, the Federalist Society. Two FedSoc, that is the conservative organization, lawyers, William Bode of the University of Chicago and Michael Stokes Paulson of the University of St. Thomas, really fed the theory in August of this past year with an early draft of an article that was forthcoming in Pennsylvania Law Review. So they said we didn't know what we would decide, and we looked into this issue, and we kind of decided that yes, in fact, Trump, although this part of the amendment was clearly designed to cover, ex-Confederates or potential South Shall Rise Again types, also applies to Trump, who did in fact disqualify himself. Colorado has been blue since Obama, kind of light blue when Trump was elected for voting for Clinton. Obama's not that long ago, but it certainly seems as if their court is pretty in the pocket for the Democrats. What did I miss? Maybe Ryan, I will specifically kick it to you first. What else is there to kind of nerd out about here? And besides the sort of initial alarm of how ridiculous this all is, what else do you have to say?
Yeah, well, the Supreme Court, Colorado, we have a lot of lawyers who are listeners, so I'll try not to embarrass
No.
myself, but I will state for the record that I did take the LSAT, although that's as far as I got back in the day. The Colorado Supreme Court, so it's a long opinion, 200 pages. A lot of it has to do with statutory questions under Colorado law, which are not that interesting to us here, and ballot access and all that. But the real rub, as you pointed out, is the 14th Amendment. And the two probably technical questions are argued very ably against the court's interpretation by our own Robert Delahunty, one of our fellows at the our Washington Center for the American Way of Life. And he points out two things, one of which is, so Section 3, which you laid out and read, his argument is that given the sort of history of the drafting of that clause, and then also sort of normal constitutional and textual interpretation rules, that is sort of comparing similar language in similar situations across the Constitution, it's clear to him, at least, and I'm convinced of his interpretation, that the president and the vice president are not officers under the United States for the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And it's the sort of extra textual part of that is, it's not specifically addressed in the Constitution, but can be inferred from it, is that Congress was laying out these rules for former Confederates not holding offices, but they wanted to reserve to themselves ultimately the power to deal with presidents and vice presidents, and the traditional power there is the impeachment power. One other part is that they talk about officers taking an oath under the Constitution in Section 3, and the president has this special position in the constitutional framework of having the only oath that's laid out in the text. So you could argue plausibly that the oath that they refer to in Section 3 is the sort of general requirement that officers of the United States take an oath to support the Constitution, whereas the president has this special oath. And going way back in presidential power, constitutional scholarship, both in the Supreme Court and then sort of academic, the big sources of presidential power in the Constitution that makes him sort of this unique executive at the top of the whole branch are both the oath of office and the commander-in-chief clause. So if you want the details of that argument, or some of them anyway, go read Robert Delahunty at American Mind, Trump's Legal Victory in Colorado. It was published 2 days ago, and he covers most of that ground. So, and the district court ruled, while the district court ruled that Trump had engaged in insurrection, she agreed with our expert testimony, which was done by Robert Delahunty, a testimony, and then an 80-page document, which is not public at the moment, but was used by the district court judge. She said that no, it's clear that the vice president, the president, are not officers under the United States under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So that's the sort of arcane details of this. I would just say, you can read, if you know how to read subheads in court cases, and all I mean by that is sort of you know how to really skip through it. 10 or 15 or 20 pages into it, the court goes through pretty succinctly why they disagree with, that is, the Colorado Supreme Court argues why they disagree with the lower court's ruling that Trump is not an officer of the United States. And I would say they make a plausible case, as one can, over a document that mentions these different offices and uses these words over and over again in context. I would say they kick up a lot of dust that allows them to somewhat plausibly make the counter argument. So you could even grant them as much deference as you want or as much merit as you want and say, okay, the question is at least ambiguous. As a prudential matter, I think the last thing we want to do, and that's Robert Delahunty's concluding point in his article, the last thing we want to do is have private litigants decide whether Trump should be able to be on the ballot in Colorado, and instead let the voters decide whether they think he's worthy in Colorado of being voted for or not. And so I think that would be a useful compromise, and we could even pull ourselves back from somewhat arcane textual arguments about this way or that. Although I think the more compelling argument is that the vice president and the president are not officers under the United States in the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Oh, last arcane detail for nerds out there. The question is whether that section, that is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, is self-executing. That is, it's text, it's there, but can any litigant raise it in court as they have here, and sort of enmesh it in Colorado statutory law and then use that as an argument to get the Secretary of State of Colorado to keep him off the ballot? And Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which is in the history of 14th Amendment jurisprudence, is a kind of forgotten but a very important part, says that Congress shall have power to enforce this amendment. So that would seem to suggest, and Robert Delahunty argues that Congress really has to affirmatively, if nothing else is true, Section 5 means that this is not self-executing, and the Supreme Court has not generally regarded constitutional text provisions as self-executing in various circumstances. So at the very least, maybe we could fall back on the position, look, Congress hasn't acted. They haven't really laid out how this might apply to the vice president and the president. They could if they wanted to, and they haven't for over a century. So best leave this to the voters rather than some technical, kick them off the ballot exercise.
I mean, all of the arcana, and I understand that, from the perspective of constitutional scholarship and argumentation, it's all necessary. But just from like a layman's perspective, I don't understand who gets to decide what insurrection, what rebellion is. Is this just something that a judge can say, oh, yes, I believe that such and such person engaged in rebellion, therefore they're not allowed to be on the ballot? I mean, Trump has not even been charged with insurrection. It's not clear to me that because people who were in a crowd that he addressed then went and started and rioted, that makes him guilty of rebellion. It's such a refracted argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard the lieutenant governor of Texas on television saying, defending the new law that they're putting in Texas about arresting illegals, saying, well, why don't we say that Biden has participated in a rebellion by refusing to enforce the border, in border controls and
Or
allowing.
seizing the power of the purse or any number of other things.
Yeah, I mean, you could. Why? I mean, it seems equally plausible to have some red state judges just say, yeah, he's contravened his authority or whatever, and remove him from the ballot.
Yeah, and Trump's lawyers argued a version of this by saying, look, this is just a political question. The courts, if they wade into this, it's just going to be a Pandora's box. And I think that's exactly right, Seth. It would be.
It's just so insane. And, there are reasonable people on the left who are saying, is this, like even like Tim Wu or Glenn Greenwald saying, is this really the way you want to, like, save democracy? It seems like a big mistake. But if you look at the Washington Post or New York Times comment sections, which it's really like the Tribune of the halfwit. Um, their readers are just like four square behind it. This is a great idea. This is perfect. Finally, somebody's going to rescue the Constitution. These
Yeah.
these judges.
Yeah, and if you, I saw some polling today on it, grains of salt as ever, especially to the extent that in which polls are often, it seems, used these days to shape public opinion rather than report it. But yeah, the Democrats are 85 in favor, Republicans are whatever it is 30-70 against this. That is Colorado Supreme Court's ruling, and independents are kind of split down the middle. So it's an unholy mess, and I think it's also just an example of we've addressed this before in other ways, but the increasing legalization of our politics. I mean, I think whatever else is true, the founders, the drafters of the 14th Amendment would, from just a prudential matter, say this cannot be the sort of thing decided by private litigants and a state Supreme Court. It just has to. Ultimately, your recourse is to the sovereign in the United States, which is the people of the United States. So, at a certain so this partakes the flavor of the modern Democratic Party's bent, which is half the country, or at least the fervent Trump supporters, are per se illegitimate, having cast a ballot for him twice and desiring to do so again. Therefore, kind of any means necessary is legitimate.
Well, and if you check in with the Washington Post editorial board, here's what they say. In the absence of clarity, a body of unelected officials should be reluctant to prevent the country's citizens from choosing an elected official to lead them. And such fine words, such beautiful words, only the best words, as Donald Trump himself is wont to say. It raises this question. It's not quite concern trolling. I'm not sure if there's like a buzzword for what that is, but you've got these respectable, self-styled moderates or liberals who are perfectly willing to stand idly by as all manner of norms are broken in ways that, at least on the margins and at least for now, tend to benefit them at the expense of those crazy, wild-eyed insurrectionists, revolutionary, white supremacist, nationalist, racist, fill in the blank. And they're so willing to allow the system to be stress test in this way because it seems on net to be good for them. And then things kind of, the needle starts to move into the red a little bit. And then, okay, well, I guess we need to put out a statement that says, wouldn't it be nice if Colorado, didn't violate a norm for the sake of slapping around Donald Trump? How many of those people really actually support what Colorado is doing? How many of them are saying this because a respectable person would say it? And so, well, we'll put out the statement, and things will continue to click along toward, toward open civil unrest and toward the complete desecration and obsolescence of the republic. How many of them believe that? We don't know. We don't really get to know. And in their capacity as members of the editorial board, they are not going to say. And so the question that I think we're facing is how much of the national political discourse is just going to be kind of throttled in this way by people who have far more radical tolerances for the real violation and destruction of constitutional norms because they happen to consider themselves to be more or less part of the winning team. That remains to be seen. But in the meanwhile, there isn't really a counterforce strong enough to prevent these kinds of norm violations from unfolding. And maybe the Supreme Court will be it. I don't think anyone feels certain of that. Although I've heard many folks say, "Oh, it's going to be 9-0. They just won't stand for it." Well, I'll believe it when I see it. And even in California, you got the lieutenant governor going out saying, just comb through every rule and regulation there is and see if you can't colorably find some reason somewhere that you can interpret and bend to the obvious will of the California regime to get Trump off the ballot. So, the temperature's rising. I doubt that the Supreme Court alone is going to be enough to stop one of these twigs from snapping. They're not load-bearing twigs in isolation, and when you put them all together, you don't get a bundle of sticks that can withstand any pressure. You probably just get a bunch of snapping twigs.
Two more just items to drop, which is one funny and light, which is that lieutenant governor's letter from California saying, directing the Secretary of State to find a way to keep Trump off the ballot in California for democracy's sake. Also said there are two requirements to be president. You must be 40 years old and you must not be an insurrectionist. So that's also
Wait,
amusing.
40? He said 40?
Considering the 40.
Oh my gosh.
She
You didn't even
said
get that
40.
right.
Wow.
So if folks, for folks not brushed up on their Article 2, you have to be 35 to be president, not 40. Then the last just little thing from the case, the Colorado Supreme Court majority, and we should maybe you did, Spencer, that this is a 4-3 decision of all Democrats on that court, or at least all Democratic appointees. So it was contentious and very close. So the Supreme Court will resolve this either way, and I have a very hard time thinking that they're going to uphold the Colorado Supreme Court. They may split the baby and uphold them on state statutory stuff, because ultimately the final say on interpretation of state statutes, or state constitutions anyway, are state Supreme Courts. But all that aside, they acknowledge that this is all very tricky, page 8 and 9 of the opinion. And I just encourage everyone to go check it out and peruse the opinion. Use the section heads as guides. You can skip all the arcana of statutory interpretation and get to their argument for these questions. But they say, we are also cognizant that we travel in uncharted territory and that this case presents several issues of first impression. But for our resolution of the elector's challenge under the election code, the secretary would be required to include President Trump's name on the 2024 presidential primary ballot. That is, but for our resolution of the elector's challenge. Therefore, to maintain the status quo pending any review by the U.S. Supreme Court, we stay our ruling until January 4th, 2024. That means it's not in operation right now. The day before the secretary's, that is the Colorado State Secretary of State's, deadline to certify the content of the presidential primary ballot. So they're not going to do anything to the ballots until the last possible minute. And then, but even then, if review is sought in the Supreme Court before the stay expires on January 4th, then the stay shall remain in place and the secretary will continue to be required to include President Trump's name on the 2024 presidential primary ballot until the receipt of any order or mandate from the Supreme Court. So this portends to be an absolute mess, because I suspect the Supreme Court will take it up. Therefore, the Colorado Secretary of State will not do anything to the ballots. They'll be printed with Trump on it. And then after that, if the Supreme Court then agreed with the Colorado Supreme Court, they'd have to reprint all the ballots. And again, I don't think that's going to happen. But the whole thing is, it's kind of an epic.
Hey, can I ask?
Yeah.
Maybe this is like sort of a junior high school style question, but why are they only talking about the primary ballots? And why the primary elections have no constitutional basis, do they? Why?
Well, only by sort of implication. It's constitutional basis in the sense that Article 1, Congress's powers defers to states to choose, the manner of selecting electors. Well, actually, it's in Article 2, the manner of selecting electors, and we don't really do it that way anymore. Now, winners of primaries become the kind of vessels for those electoral votes. So that's the argument for why the state legislature still has power over it. Hence, all the statutory Colorado statutory interpretation analysis.
And did I hear correctly that the decision says that write-in votes shall not be counted?
I actually didn't catch that part, but that'd be interesting. I suppose that would be the implication. It would be an illegitimate write-in vote because it would be unconstitutional under the Colorado Supreme Court's interpretation.
Yeah, it's probably pointless to engage in everybody's favorite game of psychological speculation about the ratio of cynicism to sincerity on the part of political opponents who seem manifestly absurd to us. But why not, since it's the end of the year, I'll give myself a little Christmas present and just ask to what extent are the people involved in these sorts of efforts genuinely persuaded that they are defenders of democracy and that what they must absolutely do to preserve our republic is tear its constitution to shreds and invoke emergencies to thwart the choice of the people in their presidential election. I sort of am getting the impression as this election cycle drags on that uh, a lot of people have it in their head, whether tacitly or explicitly, that they just need a little bit of extra constitutional emergency powers as a treat so that they can get totally unprecedented, never before seen, basically the same as Hitler, Donald Trump, out of public life altogether. And I think they imagine that if they can just squash him once and for all, which they're constantly salivating about doing and constantly failing to do so far, then they think the Constitution will be restored and our democracy will be back in place and we can all move forward and begin to heal. Nature will begin to heal. Obviously, those of us that look at this sort of stuff from any angle know that that's not how that works and that it's not actually about Trump in some deep fundamental sense. But I do get the sense that like the fact that they haven't just extinguished him yet once and for all is what is driving them so insane, and they think that once they do that, then they will be the virtuous, norm respecting, rule following Republican, small r Republicans that they imagine themselves to be, which is a feature of this like Washington Post style and in many cases express editorial policy of representing Trump as the sui generis, never before seen threat to the republic, rather than Seth, as you pointed out, somebody that people on the left don't very much like, and people on the right could just as easily and perhaps even more legitimately accuse Joe Biden of all sorts of constitutional violations from within the office. I mean, that is a distinction here. Trump, as you mentioned, made a speech, and then some people did some bad stuff, and there's a kind of circuitous serpentine connection you can make from argue that he was trying to get that to happen. I think that's pretty laughable, but Biden actually stood there in the office with his face hanging out and issued executive orders unilaterally canceling student debt and all of the stuff that he knew was unconstitutional, that he knew the courts were going to strike down, that he said he knew the courts were going to strike down, and yet did anyway. So if we're going to play that game, it seems obvious that yes, once you open this can of worms, like everything goes to hell. But also conservatives like don't think that way. Republicans aren't going to do that. I don't think they're just going to talk about it on podcasts and
Well,
TV shows.
I mean, look at what they did to George Santos. Now, I don't think he's any kind of great shakes as a congressman. He's obviously some kind of liar and thief. But
One of the great statesmen of our time, Seth. I don't know
oh,
what you're talking
absolutely.
about.
But so is Robert
Yeah,
Menendez. Um,
right, right.
Menendez is walking around with bars of Iranian gold or Turkish gold or whatever it is in his hidden in his closet. Um, things that were manifestly corrupt, like almost openly, and everybody acknowledges it. Even people in his party. There's not even the hint of suggestion that he should be expelled before he's convicted, and he's been indicted.
except
John
from John
Fetterman
Fetterman.
actually is turning out to be one of the most sensible senators, and the fact that he's brain damaged, I think maybe redounds to, it says something a lot about the Senate. Um,
At least he's openly brain damaged. At least
yeah,
we know how to factor
exactly,
that in relative to the
exactly.
others. Yeah.
So I mean, my point is that the Democrats they play dirty and kind of know it, and Republicans seem to. A lot of them think that they have to, I don't know, stay principled or something. I know both sides claim that the other side plays dirty and they don't, but I really don't see the Democrats don't seem constrained by any sense of norms the way the Republicans do.
Yeah, it's I think it's another iteration of, or another data point or data points on this crisis of the two constitutions, to quote our colleague Charles Kessler's recent volume that came out, a book, a collection of essays on this topic, or really a book on the topic. That is, we're in this weird position, and it has a lot to do with our divisions, where you have one party who views the Constitution as a kind of living document, and thus always evolving with the changing cultural mores of the age, and another party maybe just feels it kind of viscerally or doesn't quite understand, or a lot of the voters, I should say, know and love the old Constitution, and they think it's mostly written down and interpreted some, et cetera, but is fairly fixed unless you amend it. And so, with those two, the partisans of both sides arguing against each other, they can't understand each other really. So I think that's where we are.
Yeah.
So I would, to put the best case under their own terms for the modern democratic understanding of the Constitution, all they're doing in all of these instances, big and small, is upholding the quote unquote Constitution as they see it as a living document. And so it becomes synonymous with, and we've taken up this theme before, the Constitution becomes synonymous with this phrase around a lot lately, quote unquote, our Constitution, which means the way we view how democracies ought to work in the modern transatlantic West. And that's at odds with this throwback Trump and this sort of acrimonious and knuckle dragging constituency that he's, has in his sway.
Thank you, Ryan, for that. I like that interpretation of our democracy. I've never quite heard it expressed that way. Let's leave this for now. I'm sure we'll return to it when new things emerge. But let us now praise Claudine Gay, middle name fake and president of Harvard. I love this woman. I can't tell you my affection for her. It is so extreme. Academia, and especially the Ivy Leagues, are of course filled with evil mediocrities and frauds and diversity hires and many people that are all three and more, but few have so spectacularly demonstrated to the public the nature of their chicanery and dishonesty. Claudine Gay, through a mixture of sort of public performance and investigative journalism on the part of the great Chris Rufo and also Aaron Sabarium, has just really laid it all out on the table. She really did kind of give a great performance and is sort of continuing to deliver dividends here. This is the person who, under questioning in the House of Representatives by Elise Stefanik, the Republican rep, basically failed to condemn or state outright that Harvard's policy would prohibit active invitations to the genocide of the Jews. And subsequently, thanks to Rufo, also turns out to have, I guess we're still saying allegedly, plagiarized like a ton of stuff in her published work, both as a student and then later as a sort of middling or indeed subpar so-called intellectual. CNN is now reporting on this, and Rufo, in classic Chris Rufo fashion, telegraphed in advance that this was what he wanted. He wanted the mainstream press and the leftist press, which I repeat myself, to have to put this story out there. And here they are. CNN writes, in her 2012 article entitled Moving to Opportunity, the Political Effects of the Housing Mobility Experiment, published in the journal Urban Affairs Review, Gay repeatedly cited a 2003 paper from 8 economists, but failed to attribute them in at least 2 specific places where she used similar language as her source. Plagiarism experts told CNN this is a type of plagiarism. I like that CNN has to call in experts even on what constitutes plagiarism. I mean, these are pretty cut and dry cases, in my opinion. They go on to detail a range of other things that Rufo has uncovered. Now, I am going to ask advisedly the next question because I sort of don't want Gay to be fired or for this to have any consequences, because I really do think people, as much as possible, need to be driven to confront the true nature of these institutions, which really is that they are perfectly represented by Claudine Gay, a liar, a cheat, a fraud, and a participant in some of the worst trends and ideas that have ever vexed or plagued the American, or indeed the human mind and heart. I feel that the Ivies at this point should make clear and apparent that that is what they are, that is what they stand for, and that is indeed what they intend and have been intending for many years to teach your kids. But still, we watch this going on. We've been shocked before by the various malfeasances of academic administrators and Ivy League elites. And these institutions have basically carried on without great consequence or loss to their considerable prestige. In your all's opinion, in your guys' opinion, is this different? Does this make a dent? And also, is there an extent to which people kind of already know this about Harvard, but send their kids anyway?
I think you're right. I think it's good if Claudine Gay stays in power as a living banner attesting to the mediocrity of the institution. If she is a plagiarist, even if the board of governors or whoever reviewed it said, "Oh well, these aren't really important examples of plagiarism," well, then it's kind of like announcing that the institution just doesn't care what people say or how they say it or who said it before, or if what they say is original or not. It's really just a matter of who's offended by it and who's mollified by it, and what is the racial composition of the speaker. I mean, because in a sense, does plagiarism really matter if you're just mouthing received opinions? Like everything they say is essential. Nothing they say is original.
Hmm.
Everybody in the DEI complex is just saying the same thing over and over again about white supremacy and white privilege and institutional racism. So, from that perspective, it doesn't really matter if you're a plagiarist. Um,
Right.
you know, Plagiarism is really the I steal, therefore I am. Maybe should be the new
It's
way
the
of
stock and
looking at it.
trade. Yeah.
I don't know. I want to see some wins. I think that it's just so difficult to put the Borg on the back foot, and even just getting a couple of these Ivy League presidents to resign or to be replaced. Yeah, there's always the like, well, they'll just find someone who's an even more weaponized and bulletproof radical to install. I mean, maybe, but there's got to be somewhere to go on offense to take the initiative. And I think this is clearly a weak point. The the Ivies are increasingly a battleground on the left of center, and there is a growing number of respectable left of center people in academia who have been silencing themselves. And well, next month the wave will roll back. Well, next year the wave will roll back, and it's not rolling back. It's not going to. And these, individually or in their little faculty lounges, these folks are not going to one day find the courage to stand up. They're going to maybe squeak here or there and get steamrolled. So, in order for that latent base of reasonableness people to be activated, whether maybe not at the front of the line, but maybe just padding out the counter revolution, there need to be powerful, prominent moments of startling and even awe-inspiring victory against what seems to be a body that cannot really be beaten, a blob that cannot be rolled back. Well, it can be, and it starts with high-profile wins against figures that everyone knows are there for the wrong reasons, and ought to be knocked off the pedestal. These guys have torn down a lot of statues, and it's time that some of their figureheads get torn down as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the Spencer and Seth's points raised are valid, but yeah, we should press this advantage. And what someone should do now is give a research organization, us or whomever else. Chris Rufo's building a small team that does a lot of things. Could give it to Chris, but maybe some institution other than Chris could do it, and then he could just feed it all to Chris and his team. But we should be running all the academic papers of all the most prestigious faculty in the country through turnitin.com, and I bet you will find a lot more. And we should use this as an opportunity to drum all these people out of academia. And you might even find, as you sort of have seen reported out of kind of in fits and starts out of Harvard, this is it's pissing off the normal faculty who who might be left of center or liberals, but who still are committed to academic standards. And they're realizing that this woman who that maybe they privately suspected was a mediocrity, having interacted with her, is now totally confirmed. And not only is she a mediocrity, but she's a fraud. And I think there are a lot more. So you could drive a wedge into the academy on this front, among others, and you should. So let 1,000 plagiarism investigations bloom.
Well, I like not being the most hopeful or starry-eyed person on the podcast for once. That's a nice change for me, and I certainly would welcome if we can get the wins that you guys are talking about. Would absolutely welcome them. I think this is a place where a yes and approach is totally called for. You want to try everything you can, and Rufo is the guy to do it. If anybody is, to get these guys out to really just clean house. And I think you want to encourage people in the meantime to boycott, divest, and sanction, and to pull out all of their massive donations, as people are sort of starting to do at Harvard, and direct them elsewhere, to Hillsdale, to, I don't know, the Claremont Institute. I mean, this is all like definitely our friend Inez Stetman, who writes for us from time to time and is really good on education policy. She's got these kind of two drums that she beats. One is money and the other is law. And she points out that there are actually things that you can do, as, for example, DeSantis did in Florida, in the law, to ensure that taxpayer dollars don't go to fund this poison. But you also can, and wealthy donors should, pull your money from all of these places, because they are, a lot of these donations, these yearly donations, go on autopilot. And the nice kind of boomer era liberals that just think, well, the kids are a little bit crazy, they don't turn around and pay attention until something truly striking like this happens, at which point perhaps they can be convinced to just cut off the funding sources, which is perhaps one of the most likely things to make people take notice right quick if the money dries up. And I also think I would add a third thing here, which is, in addition to wanting people out of these positions, we should also want many of these positions themselves obliterated. Obviously, universities should and will have presidents, so Claudine Gay's position is not one that falls into this category, but every diversocrat, every pointless, stupid email pusher that sits in these halls of academic power and jams up what should be the smooth operation of the systems that we use to transmit our most precious wisdom, needs not simply to be fired, but not to be replaced. I think that's another important thing to add. Okay, I've held off as long as I could, and I'm going to blame this. I'm going to blame this on Seth, because Seth tells me he actually has something interesting to say about the gay Senate sex tape. And everybody's been talking about it online. I assumed we would have to talk about it. It's a sordid story, but here it is. We've heard that an aide from Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, a Democrat, but did I really need to tell you that, has been filmed having gay sex in a Senate hearing room, Hart 216.
Wait, the senator didn't film it.
Sorry. Oh my gosh! I somehow made this story worse.
That's just what they want you to think.
It was not the senator who filmed himself having sex, but rather his aide, whose name was not released, but who has been identified as Aiden Mae. I don't no idea how to pronounce that name. I have trouble pronouncing modern names under any circumstance, but that one is anybody's guess. Anyway, that's the guy, the aide, who filmed himself having sex in Senate hearing room, Hart 216. Politico points out that this is right between where Senators Amy Klobuchar and Chris Coons were sitting at a recent Senate Judiciary Committee markup. Cardin himself, although he did not have gay sex in this room, issued a statement, pretty lukewarm in my opinion, but perhaps getting some sort of advice to keep it quiet. Said, "I was angry, disappointed. It's a breach of trust." Yeah, that's putting it mildly. This to me is a just really appalling and sordid tale. Seth, explain yourself. What do you have to say about this situation?
Well, I don't want to. I hope I didn't lead you to think that I had something brilliant to say, but I do have an
You did.
observation.
I'm waiting. If this is not absolutely dazzling,
Okay,
mind blowing,
okay,
I'm
I
very
like a
upset.
challenge. Well, here's the thing. Okay, so this kid, Aiden Mays, whatever is Aiden. Let's just call him Aiden Mays. No, he's like he's a rising star of some sort. I'm not going to say that he's like a superstar, but look, he featured in he was quoted as saying that voting for Biden was the most exciting thing in his life back in March of 2020. He featured in an TV ad for Biden, and he's been working in Democratic policy circles and political circles since he was in high school. He worked for Feinstein, he worked for Liz Warren, and now he's working for Ben Cardin. These are three senior senators. So clearly, I think he had caught the notice and attention of someone. And I suspect he was being groomed in like the traditional sense for, a career. And what he reminds me of is Sam Brinton, that
Huh.
the cross-dressing trans, non-binary, the first non-binary official in government, the guy who stole luggage, dressed in dresses and stole luggage, and was supposedly an expert on nuclear waste disposal, but who had similarly gained, renown in the anti-conversion therapy movement, and went around giving speeches and testimony. So what I think we're seeing is this tendency in the Democratic Party to identify not just diverse candidates, but actual deviants, like sexual deviants, and
Mhm.
to promote them and elevate them. And I say that because this fellow Aiden Mays, he was photographed out at, I don't know if it was at some kind of street fair, wearing the same bondage harness that he was filmed having sex in the Senate Judiciary offices wearing.
Mhm.
So he's pretty open about whatever it is he does. I mean, he walks around in a bondage harness outside.
Hmm.
Um, I think that there's this, like I said, this tendency to expand the the realm of what's acceptable in politics and society generally. The left is always really into this idea, say in like literary studies, like we need to look to the margins, like both the margins of society and textual margins, and we need to center the margins. So you go and you find people like Sam Brinton or this kid, and you bring them in, and you center them, you amplify their voice, you boost their signal.
Hmm.
But the problem is when you do that, you can't lose sight of the fact that you're dealing with people who for whom deviancy from norms is practically their religion. So, okay, you get this trans non-binary type person. Oh, what do you know? He also likes to steal luggage. You get this like bondage sex maniac. oh, gee, not only is he like a competent writer of emails, but he also likes to have sex and film himself in, you know, esteemed public offices. So I think this is kind of an interesting tension that the Democrats are kind of having to deal with. Like, oh, well, it's great to hire like weirdos and deviants to show how normal they are, but the problem is they aren't normal, and that's why you hired them.
Yeah, I think this is a case of compliance culture trying to substitute itself for competence culture. For all of the deviants, these people are relentlessly conformist, and there is a whole of government, whole of society, as the phrase goes, effort to fill the ranks of government with people whose foremost overarching super identity is not one of the many stripes on the flag, but is the Borg itself. A Borg that you can trust to keep the trains running on time, keep the wheels on the wagon, keep America, I don't know, somewhere in the superpower global hegemon realm, so that you can pursue your, what Richard Rorty would call your idiosyncratic personal projects freely and with abandon, whether in the privacy of your own home or in the august chambers of the people's house. This is a big swing. This is a big gambit. When the ordinary American has an interaction with the federal government, what they discover is, I think, that the rot is eating away at basic competence and the basic functions of the federal apparatus more quickly than the Borg can automate away the incompetence and the ineptitude that is increasingly defining the regime. And look, when I put on my most sympathetic and generous attitude, and I say to myself, okay, you're a center left statesman. You're sizing up the demographic trends. You're trying to stay a step ahead of what's happening to the United States of America. You're looking at what the competition overseas is doing. You're thinking, gosh, how can I sort of retool America to be ready for the 21st century, even though we're already 20 odd years into it? The America of the future. How do I set in motion this process that is going to ensure that America can outlast and outproduce China, or the Asian bloc or whatever? Especially when you look at what China's doing with technology. Yes, it always leaves a sour taste in our mouth to say, like, well, China is becoming the Borg, so we should do it faster. But there are these pressures. There are these geopolitical pressures, and everyone recognizes them. You see the birth rate and all these sort of indicators, and it is rather dire, and it does call for some sort of sweeping and an urgent and profound rejiggering of some kind. And so, if you're one of these higher caste lefties trying to solve this problem before it becomes unsolvable, sure, logically speaking, given your priors, you're going to say, well, obviously, what we need to do is just kind of force white Christian default Americans off the stage, get them out of the institutions. They're getting old. They're pining away for a world that doesn't really exist anymore. We're all familiar with the logic, and so it's not shocking to see the left statesman policy class double, triple, quadruple down on the Rainbow Coalition and on it doesn't matter how demented and depraved your sexual proclivities are. Come one, come all, come as you are. We will find a bureaucratic job for you. You will love America because America loves you. It's a sensible approach given how they think and how they assess the situation. But it's just not working. It isn't just like transforming the character of America while ensuring that America remains competent and functional and can sort of deliver the goods in the basic way. The IRS is a mess. The all of the TSA and DHS. This is a sprawling, incompetent shambles. And so I think the regime is beginning to recognize this and is scrambling to automate as much of government and turn as much of America into this social credit regime as it can, because it really isn't very good at doing anything except selectively policing people and coercing behavior. The number one use case for all of these uh, automated government sort of technologies of governance, it's a compulsory. It's we're going to force you to onboard. You're going to be in this system, and most of what we do, because it's really all that we can do particularly well using these machines, is to just supervise you, make sure you say things we want you to say, discourage you from doing things we don't want you to do, and creating a financial system where the amount of juice that you have rises or falls based on your compliance. Um, that's not just disfiguring of America, and some would go so far as to say, fatal to America. It's just a big bet, and the cards, geopolitical cards, really do seem to be stacked against us. So, this is kind of a perverse way of looking for a
Mm.
silver lining, um, but it really does seem to be a race against time that the regime is losing. And for all of the norm violation and constitution treading upon that we are seeing, and for all of the many reasons for the black pills to show up in our little pill cup every morning, I do think that the fundamentals, the overarching situation, it's just a really tough problem set for the regime. And I think for ideological reasons they had to place their bets the way that they did. But you just look at what's going on internationally. Look at an utter failure the Ukraine policy has been. Situation in the Mid East is spiraling. What's going on in the Red Sea? I mean, you can really just see the fundamentals lining up against this American regime and its international allies, some of whom are getting pretty tired of being allies, judging by how much Europe has had to just um, accept a really reduced junior role. It's not making people happy, and especially since October 7th, deep, profound disagreements within the regime itself. It just all seems tremendously weak, and just because this regime has positioned itself to be very good at putting its thumb on cantankerous right wingers at all levels of society does not mean that that it's very good at anything else. And I think the seams are really beginning to show. And I wouldn't be surprised if there started to be some really major malfunctions over the next 12 months.
All right, I'll buy it. That's there is actually something interesting to say about this scandal. Thank you both for illuminating it. And actually, I think that's a really nice transition into closing out our episode here. We typically finish each show with Read the Damn Site, a roundup of pieces that we think you should particularly check out at AmericanMind.org. It's not that there aren't a lot of pieces you should check out at AmericanMind.org. There definitely are. But we figured for this, our 200th episode and our final episode of the year, we would replace Read the Damn Site with an extra special segment, What a Damn Year. It's been a huge year, both out there in the world and here at the Claremont Institute. Lots of things going on, lots to discuss. And we thought we would just give a quick roundup of one thing that makes us either hopeful or that we find particularly remarkable. Doesn't have to be a good thing, could be a bad thing, just something of tremendous significance that we wanted to reflect on going forward. I'll start, and I'll actually bring it back to something that we talked about on one of our previous segments. We were discussing whether we think Harvard should get cleaned out of DEI bureaucrats or simply allowed to stew in its own corruption. I'm a little bit more in the latter camp, although I think my fellow podcasters have made good cases for the former. But in either case, this is an area very near and dear to my heart, place that I think that I care about a lot, which is education. something that we have perhaps neglected to realize, what the ancients realized, which is that education is inherently political. The way you shape the souls of the young uh, will transform the regime that you're able to have, will expand or contract the possibilities for what kinds of civilization you are able to build. And beyond all of that, as the ancients also knew, wisdom from the past is inherently beautiful and desirable. Mankind by nature reaches out to know. It's a crying shame that that sacred trust has been betrayed by these evil scumbags. And I personally find it at once uh, sorrowful, but also weirdly hopeful to imagine that this is an area in which in 2024 renegade institutions might continue to gather steam, and we might see a resurgence of a uniquely and distinctively American fact, trend, tendency, which is that of the Yeoman autodidact. It's really distinctively in America that local institutions and individuals reach out for Shakespeare, reach out for the classics of Greece and Rome. I've had the honor of experiencing that hunger on my other podcast, Young Heretics, where I just sort of talk about this stuff and people write in and they say, "Hey, I'm a farmer on my tractor. I'm a cop on the beat. I'm a homeschool mom. I'm an elementary school teacher." I mean, these are all real examples of folks out there not necessarily anointed by our unspoken class system or our academic elites to gain access to the secret halls of academe, but simply taking the initiative into their own hands and taking ownership over the life of the mind. And to me, this is just one of the most beautiful things about this country, which I love with all of my heart, even still, even now, no matter what else goes wrong. I cannot tamp down my natural affection for this, my native land. And I just am really grateful to be part of an institution, part of a podcast, part of a group of guys and editors that are providing the resources for people to do that. We talk a lot about black pills on this site. There are plenty to be had, but as Ryan often says, we're happy warriors, and I'm grateful for you guys and for all of our listeners in 2003 and on into 2024. Seth, what do you got?
Um, that's a tough act to follow, Spencer. Um,
Sorry.
no, that's all right. I mean, this last year has been fraught with all kinds of personal and I mean, political and personal turmoil. But that's okay. That's to be expected. Um, on the grand level, I would say that um, I've been kind of amazed at the uh, the almost. I mean, it almost seems like it's an automatic, mechanical type of response now, as the polity just turns from COVID to George Floyd to Trump to insurrection to Ukraine. The way these things just happen, they just click over, and it's like East Asia. Oceania was always at war with East Asia, and there's nothing to be said about it. And now, of course, to Palestine and Israel. What I feel is a somewhat uh, misinformed population running amok, holding protests every day in the streets. Um, so I'm not saying it doesn't upset me particularly. It's just something I watch kind of with amazement. But you know what? I too am grateful to. I'm extremely grateful to have this platform to be connected with the Claremont Institute and with like-minded souls whom I get to meet. Everyone from a Hoboken accountant at a Claremont function to just the widest range of people who contact me on Twitter and elsewhere to say that they appreciate what we're doing. Um, I think that 2024 is going to be challenging. I think we're going to face a lot of A lot of unknown unknowns, but it'll be interesting. Anyway, I'm grateful to be so situated as we face the choppy waters.
Yeah, very well said, Seth. James, what do you got?
I think the best way that I can address this prompt is to just floor the accelerator on my last round of comments and go crashing through the guardrails and into the canyon for a spectacular end to what has been certainly not the the best and brightest year in our collective history, 2023. What's the regime to do? Well, I think basically their best option is to keep anyone who thinks of themselves as a patriotic American nervous and off balance, whether through lawfare or mob fare or whatever, and basically put a gun to the head of America's leading technologists and tell them that they're basically being nationalized, they're being conscripted to build the woke supercomputer. And if they don't like it, they can have all of their assets stripped, they can be thrown in jail, so on and so forth. Jamie Dimon, Elizabeth Warren, even our sometime friend Matt Stoller, who's sort of a Teddy Roosevelt lefty, I guess. These people really think that crypto should be illegal, that only criminals use it. I mean, out and out insanity. This is really one of the only Bitcoin I'm talking about, one of the only fully mature technologies that regular Americans can use to circumvent the Borg in order to do things Americans have always done with their technologies, use them together freely in association to make goods and services and exchange them and fun and profit. But these are the stakes. The regime's policy isn't working out very well. Could have told them that. They should have thought about it earlier. Too late, alas. They need Americans' top technologists in order for them to maintain and consolidate their grip on power. And it's no surprise, given all that we've seen, that if you're a young, enterprising, ambitious, intelligent person out there, especially if you're a young male, you look around and you say, well, hell, I'm just going to go, work for the most powerful US technologist I can work for, or I'm going to raise from them and I'm going to just build something. And politics is obviously a lost cause and is irredeemably broken. Most Americans are now just too stupid to function. And, may the devil take the hindmost. This is an attitude that is setting in. It is dangerous in its way, but it's also quite understandable. And so I think we're going to see this come to a head. And I think, in the way that we've seen some of the big figures on the tech right get kind of knocked out, and we've seen Elon Musk sort of rise up to establish a certain kind of leadership. That's where the action is going to be. And anyone on the right who doesn't really understand what's unfolding there and doesn't really understand the stakes, I think is going to be pushed to the margins of the political fight and of American life. I'll be doing my bit to try to steer that kind of rolling bar fight in a productive direction. I look forward to mustering some combination of friends and colleagues and fellow travelers to make sure that ends up being a fruitful exercise. And so I'm it's hard to look at America in 2023 and feel like it'll be okay. But so much of what people see when they look at America is just this regime flailing around and doing way much more harm than good. They are increasingly sensitive to the spiritual stakes involved in this conflict and in what this regime is doing. And so in spite of it all, I think that this is a phase. It's a passing torment, and there's going to be more pain one way or the other. But after all, whether you're talking childbirth or being a gym bro or working on a piece of art that's going to be any good, it all involves pain. And certainly, we all deserve lots more pain. So pain's part of the process, and I look forward to making it all worth it down the road.
Ryan, as our fearless leader, head honcho, publisher president, I'll give you the last word.
Thanks, Spencer. I'll just say stay on after Spencer's sign off for another installment of my son Albert doing his short little podcast, which he always ends with podcast over. But in the meantime, we'll run that for a few more weeks until we run out of clips. I think we've got 5 of them. I would one thing I've sensed, well, not sensed. That's a little trite or too understated. And what we've all seen over the past better part of this year, this calendar year, and we'll continue to see at least for another couple months, I think, is increasing rancor, especially in the kind of broadly speaking pro-Trump movement between DeSantis partisans in the primary and Trump partisans in the primary. I would just make a plea to everyone. It's been most sort of nasty on Twitter. And a lot of the nastiness are not a lot of people not really involved in, for lack of a better term, the conservative movement or this new populist nationalist Trumpist movement or whatever you want to call it. Although there are some that are pretty involved and will be involved who've also been nasty. But I would encourage everyone to bury hatchets sometime in the spring, I suspect, because if we all don't hang together, we're surely going to hang separately, to repeat a shop-worn phrase. I know it will be tough for a lot of people because there has been a lot of rancor and nastiness, especially on social media. But we're going to need all the help we can get, whoever the nominee is. And I suspect, barring acts of God or some crazy exogenous shock, it will be Trump. That we need to find some way to get over the last season of differences and acrimony and work together. Because my plea to the pro-Trump all the way folks would be, you can't just write all these people off and blackball them forever from any positions, because there is a distinction to be made between the partisans of DeSantis who are just rhinos glomming on and will want to run the same playbook that rhinos did in the last Trump administration. Those certainly keep an eye out for and try to exclude them from positions of power and influence. But there are a lot of DeSantis partisans who are patriots, who regard a lot of the problems, if not all of the problems, of the modern administrative state and the way we conduct foreign policy and the problem of the deep state, the intelligence community. They share those concerns. So you're going to need those people because there aren't enough of you to do all the work that needs doing. And then on the other side, some of the more vociferous DeSantis partisans will say that, Trump's just surrounded by a bunch of useless grifters and all these people are scam artists. And so we got to, basically destroy all them. I would counsel against that as well. And there are a lot of good people on both sides of that issue. It's been a momentous part, at least for those of us who watch all this closely, of the last, starting basically once DeSantis got in. And so I would, have magnanimity and victory in the primary process and try to draw upon all the talents that you can, because you're going to need all of them. And so go out there with an open mind and an open heart, and be steely-eyed against those who really do want to continue to undermine the country in league with the Uniparty. But at the same time, there's a lot of good people on both sides. Fine people on both sides.
Hear, hear. Well said, Ryan. And this concludes our 2023 Roundtable programming. We're going to take the week off next week, as many people are doing. We hope you do too. Get some rest, be with family, spend some time with those closest to you, and thinking about the reason for the season, what's most truly important in all of this. We couldn't do this without you. We're very grateful to you. I will remind you that you can learn more about the work we do at claremont.org. You can also check out americanmind.org and claremontreviewofbooks.com, where our sister publication, the CRB, has fairly recently put out a new issue. If you would like to donate to support the work we do at this festive season of the year, we're always incredibly grateful for that. It's part of how we keep the lights on. You go to claremont.org/donate. And if you really want to give us a little Christmas present, you can share the show, spread the word, drop it into your group chat, tweet about it, give us 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you are currently using. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks very much to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and a very Merry Christmas and a happy new year to all of you. We will talk to you in 2024.
So, today, it's a different day. Today, you can go outside wherever you want because today, it's snowy day. It's Christmas and it's snowing. So get out and put on your mittens, get on your jackets, and go out and play in the snow. Podcast over.